End of World War II, a young woman found herself stranded on a remote island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean with 32 testosterone-filled military sailors. As you can imagine, there were numerous fights among the men, all of them competing for her attention. Why did such a story unfold, and how did it end? We'll tell you all about it in our video. Anatahan is a tiny volcanic island in the Pacific Ocean. As part of the Mariana Islands, Anatahan covers an area of 33.9 square kilometers. Originally colonized by the Spanish, they later sold the island to the Germans, who in turn sold it to the Japanese. The Japanese established extensive coconut plantations on Anatahan and sent an official, Kikuichiro Higa, to oversee approximately 45 workers on these plantations. Upon arrival, Kikuichiro Higa appointed his relative, Shoichi Higa, as his deputy. Shoichi arrived on the island with his 28-year-old wife shortly before the outbreak of World War II. When World War II began, all the workers left the island. Shoichi Higa also decided to leave temporarily. He was deeply worried about his sister and wanted to take her from Saipan, an island located about 120 kilometers south of Anatahan. Before leaving, Shoichi promised his relative Kikuichiro and his wife Kazuko that he would return in a month. However, in the end, he never came back. 2 years later, a romance blossomed between Kazuko and Kikuichiro, since they were the only people left on Anatahan to maintain the plantations. Soon, they even decided to get married. Their life together was uneventful until June 1944, when one morning, American planes bombed 3 Japanese warships near the island. The ships sank, but several sailors managed to swim to Anatahan, where Kikuichiro Higa and his wife Kazuko welcomed them. The 32 surviving sailors, along with their captain, started settling on the island. For the first few months, they lived relatively comfortably, relying on local fruits, vegetables, animals, and even brewing their own coconut wine. One of the few times they were troubled by the war was when a US B-29 bomber crashed on Anatahan in 1945. The settlers scavenged the wreckage and used the materials to make pots, pans, dishes, knives, shelters, and even clothing from unused parachutes. Unaware that the war had ended, the settlers continued their lives on the island. And since Kazuko was the only woman on the island, surrounded by 30 men, trouble was inevitable. A sailor named Gensaburo Yoshino began an affair with Kazuko and decided to kill her husband. Soon, her husband Kikuichiro was shot with a combat revolver by Gensaburo. However, Gensaburo had no idea that Kazuko was also involved with another sailor, Morio Chiba, who, unwilling to share his woman, stabbed Gensaburo Yoshino to death. Although Kazuko was not particularly beautiful, she was still the only woman on the island. Before long, she took over her late husband's position as the island's leader, becoming the main object of desire and obsession for all the men. Captain Ishida, the highest-ranking soldier, hoped to ease the competition among his men by marrying Kazuko to the most aggressive and hot-tempered sailor, Riichiro Yanagibashi. Mysteriously, the new husband drowned shortly after the wedding. Kazuko then took 4 more husbands, each of whom was eventually killed by other sailors in a frenzy of lustful revenge. The sailors nicknamed Kazuko the Bee Queen, and they were all willing to fight and kill for her. But the conflicts were not just about Kazuko. There was also a power struggle over who would control the plantations. In total, 11 men died in the battle for Kazuko's heart. The last sailor to die suffered 13 stab wounds in a brutal fight over her. By July 1950, the men decided that Kazuko was causing more trouble than she was worth and planned to kill her. When Kazuko learned that her life was in danger, she hid and managed to send a radio signal from the other side of the island to an American ship passing by, calling for rescue. Another account claims that a Japanese man working for the U.S. government sailed to Anatahan and secretly took Kazuko away on a boat. One way or another, upon returning to Japan, Kazuko briefly toured cities as a local celebrity, telling her strange story of being the queen of Anatahan. As if her story couldn't get any stranger, when she returned to her home in Okinawa, she found her first husband, Shoichi, and remarried him. After her fame faded, Kazuko disappeared into obscurity before dying in the early 1970s. The surviving sailors continued living on Anatahan for another year after their queen had left. The U.S. kept dropping leaflets on the island, informing them that the war was over. When that didn't work, planes started dropping letters from the sailors' families and Japanese authorities urging them to surrender. Finally, the sailors surrendered, waving white flags on the beach to a passing ship on June 30th, 1951. After the Japanese left, a small group of Northern Mariana Islands residents settled on the western side of Anatahan. They were evacuated in 1990 after an earthquake triggered a series of volcanic eruptions between 2003 and 2008. Since then, the island has remained uninhabited. Kazuko's and her soldier's story has been retold in books and films, one of which was directed by Josef von Sternberg. Dark retellings often depict the Queen of Anatahan as a Machiavellian seductress manipulating men for her amusement. Others portray her as a helpless victim. The true story of what really happened on Anatahan will only ever be known by those who were there.